Hello, this is John with Theology Ed. This is part 21 of the iPet Goat 2 Explained series, but it's not just part 21. It's also going to be a bit more time sensitive than some of the other ones. We're going to be looking at the whole timeline again and trying to get an idea of what we should be expecting between June 21st to July 5th. I am not, I don't know what word I could use for it. I'm not one to believe that enormous catastrophes are going to happen in this period. I know I've seen other channels that are also starting to do work on this date range or talking about it, and they're talking about, huge catastrophes happening, end of the world type stuff, all in a day or in a week or very quickly. I at this point, I don't subscribe to that idea. I think it's possible that you'll see some really big things, but it's also possible we won't. And I suspect we won't see enormous events that are obvious to us. And what I want to do is I want to review a little bit here, and then I'm going to bring in some new stuff that's going to show us how we can be mistaken. When we're looking at these things, we're trying to interpret a video, and when we're interpreting texts, books, music, or in this case, videos, symbols, and so on, we have to keep an eye out for and keep in mind that there's metaphor, there's symbolism that uses violent, destructive images to represent things going on internally, emotionally, things like that. So I want to discuss a possibility here that I think is actually really plausible that I think people would overlook if we weren't looking at it correctly. So I'm going to throw it out there as a possibility and make sure people are aware of it as well. So a couple things. First, let's look at the timeline to review what we've arrived at, I'll call it exegetically, by trying to explain and pull out of the video what's there over the last 20 parts of the series. And then, after we've reviewed that timeline a little bit, I'm going to show you something about the attack on Trump depicted in the video. Now, take a look. Here's our timeline again. It's been a while since I've reviewed this, and there's a lot of new subscribers since I've gone over this in the series. The timeline down here begins in 2001. There was the June 21st Solstice Eclipse in 2001. It was also the first solar eclipse, total solar eclipse of the millennium. So it was a very big deal. And notice that the event attack at that point did not happen on the date. They delayed it almost 3 months into September, on the September 11th, with the September 11th attacks in Manhattan. So we have the event, and then it goes to the September 11th attacks. And it is certainly, I'm confident that it was the June 21st eclipse in 2001 that was the signal for them. Remember the song from Leonard Cohen, First We Take Manhattan. He says, I'm guided by a signal in the heavens. A single signal. And he says, first we take Manhattan, then we take Berlin. And so both of those attacks, Manhattan and Berlin, represent the free world, with the Kennedy speech, very famous Cold War Kennedy speech, in which he said, we're all Berliners, and so on. When we look at that, those two events are related to a single signal. A signal in the heavens, uses the singular. And so I think the signal that they had in mind in both of them is not just the June 21st in 2020 and something else in 2001. It was the June 21st solstice eclipse in both cases. And so we have the solstice eclipse. That was the date that was important to them, astrologically or astronomically, as far as we're concerned, but in their astrological way of understanding things, with all the sort of superstitious assignment of powers to the stars and sun and eclipses and these sorts of things. They took it from June 21st, and then the attack didn't happen for months. So we already get an example of delay. It's totally possible, normal, and I think expected. So we have that. But then after 17 years, we begin the second round. That began with the Great American Eclipse on August 21st, 2017. That shows up in the sequence as an important starting point for them as far as you could say, the destruction of the United States is concerned. It showed up in the Simpsons episode. It shows up in iPet Go 2. The calendar, the classroom calendar, represents 2017 in one reading of it. Is one layer of the meaning. But then at 2020, we get the eclipse. Okay? And so after the 2017 Great American Eclipse, which is on the eye in what is in the 2017 calendar, August, right there, that head, we wait a few years, and we end up getting started in 2020 with a lockdown in China, but then the World Health Organization declaration of a lockdown or of a pandemic, which led to a lockdown globally in March. That was March 11th. That's why I had a little lock there. And so March 11th was that declaration. Afterwards, you see the barbed wire going around and confining people. That's a representation of the lockdown. That's the circumstance that the world will be in when things really start to fall apart. And that's why the goat at the beginning of IPEC 02 is behind barbed wire already locked up. That's the environment. Now, we see that spreading. That starts on March 11th, okay? And then the next big date is the big date. That's the solar eclipse, the annual eclipse on the solstice day. And that starts, that happens on June 21st. And then right after that, we get the follow-up buck moon. So these two events right here, the June 21st eclipse and the July 4th, 5th night buck moon, those are key events. That's like the turning point of the whole thing. That's where we see things change. It doesn't necessarily mean enormous catastrophe. And I explained that when we discussed the tarot cards in the classroom, on the chalkboard and in the classroom. There are several tarot cards, and those are parts, I think, 6 and 7 of the series. And at that point, we discussed here we have the downward pointing ace of spades in her shirt, or in her blouse, how it's cut. Okay, and it's a downward pointing ace of spades, which corresponds to the tarot card, which is the ace of swords. And one of the things that when supposedly, I'm not a tarot reader, I'm not into that stuff, I don't think it has any meaning as far as real power or divinatory use, but these people do. And so putting it in there, I'm not reading tarot cards here. I'm just saying this is what these tarot card readers would say is going on. One thing that I was reading is that they say if you have this downward pointing, an inverted or upside down ace of swords in your spread of tarot cards, that means that the changes and the things that are starting to happen, it may take you up to a year to actually perceive them, to understand them, to grasp it. And so from here, June 21st, all the way through July 2021, I put a 1 year-ish period to grasp what's going on. In other words, the transition that's going to be happening, starting in June, July, is something that, unless you're really tuned into what's going on, it may take you a while to really grasp what's going on and the significance of it. And that's very typical of how we know that these people have operated in the past. They don't just come out and attack hard and say, we did it. They blame other things. They've got ways to blame other countries through false flag attacks or organizations. They've got ways to blame nature using weapons, weather modification weapons, and so on, so that they can make storms or earthquakes or tsunamis. And most people are going to look at it and say, oh, wow, it's just bad luck. Nature is against us or whatever. And so they have ways to do things that if you're not paying close attention to what's going on and understanding who's in charge and as far as temporally speaking, who these people are and what types of things they're capable of doing and actually doing, you'll miss it. And so it takes a while to get it, okay? And so we have a year in there. We also have, outside the classroom, we have the Neptune stationing retrograde, which starts on the June 23rd date. And we see it here as well, okay? The trident representing Neptune and the retrograde, okay? And that date range goes from 6/23, June 23rd, through 11/29, so November 29th. And it's during this time it appears from the video that we're probably going to see water events, storms, flooding, perhaps hurricanes, perhaps tsunamis, perhaps earthquakes. These are also the domain of Neptune. So these things are the domain of Neptune, the god of the sea, okay, for them. And so they have Neptune stationing retrograde as an important marker of a period. And it's not a surprise because you see throughout the video lots of water everywhere. It looks like a lot of water events and difficult times in that respect. So that's possibly or probably what we'll see is some water activity here, okay, storms and so on. Now, we also go over and we get a calendar in the city. as well. And this calendar in the city begins when Harpocrates is resurrected out of the dome here. And he goes around and we get this eclipse and we get another eclipse at the end. And that is the calendar from December of 2020 through December of 2021. All of which is an important period of time in Ipet Goat 2 before Ra Horkut and Harpocrates are going to exit and be birthed into totally the new Eon. In other words, this is not a one-night event. This isn't a 2-week event. This is a series of events that are going to appear gradual and probably going to take a while to continue. Even the China scene, the Asian girl's wearing the tiger on the back of her jacket or shirt, and that could indicate even that we're looking at going all the way into the year of the tiger, as that New Year's would be when? In 2022, February. So we could be looking all the way into 2022 as part of the timeline, at least, for Ipet Goat 2. So this isn't probably, and everything happens in this short date range here, from June 21st to July 5th. And in fact, because we have the example from 2001 of a delay, you can't. My initial way of thinking about this initially was that nothing may happen of significance between June 21st and July 5th. However, I did run into, and we saw this in part, I think 17, I said, first attack before July 5th. And that was based off of, again, reading this out of Ipet Goat 2 against what I really want to say, because I don't really want to have to say that anything's going to happen between then. But I do think the video represents something as happening. And we get that from this, right? So we have the shot or whatever to the left of the buck moon. That's one place we see this, but this isn't the only place, right? You see it right there. We also see outside, just before the lunar south node symbol, the flag pin, like an attack spot, okay? With what looks like Sirius, the dog star being the brightest star in the night sky here. That's when Sirius disappears with the July 3rd through August 11th period. So this is the dog star going out of sight for a period of time and being doubled up with the sun. So you have two suns in the sky, okay? Now, we also saw it out here with the gun shooting and hitting right before the representation of the night of the buck moon. Right? The night of the buck moon is a penumbral eclipse. There's the umbra, the earth. Here's the moon just outside in the penumbra. That's representing the eclipse. You also have a dog-looking island here. This island also, interestingly, looks like the buck rabbit. A lot of commentators have pointed out that's the eye and that's an ear looking that direction, which I think is also correct. So we're seeing a representation that makes it look like the alignment of Sirius with the penumbral eclipse, the dog, plus the buck, being the buck rabbit, the buck moon. We're getting it all right here. This is your buck moon, and just like we've seen in these other places, the shot hits right before it in the chronology. There's the sun light on the shark. So we know the sun side is over here, the moon side's here. So we're going from June 21st to July 5th. And the shot hits just before. So just like it hits just before here, just like it hits just before here, we're seeing it again. And this is an interesting thing because we see the whole sequence of the shot, not just firing, we see it hitting. Hitting before. Oops. So now that makes us think, we're seeing not just, as far as interpretation is concerned, it looks like we have to say that not only will some things get started, at least one thing seems to hit before July 5th. And that's why I kept mentioning, I mentioned that in that video. Here as well, we see in the same sequence, the sun side is over here. That is your June 21st eclipse to the right of the screen, if you want to think of it that way. It's over there. You get darker as we go over here, and this is going to be your buck moon. We're going right to left in the scene then. And just like in the other places, we have a shot fired from the closer to the June 21st date in the direction of the Trump-like profile right there. There's your shot. There's the Trump-like profile in this timeline. So, okay. Now, what I want to look at now is how I ran into a little difficulty with interpretation. On the one hand, it looks like it's Trump being shot at, right? There, That's Trump being shot. You go in the classroom as well. We have the shark aimed at the head of Bush, then the shark aimed at the head of Obama, and, well, where's Trump going to be? Oh, right there. The shark is going to, when the shark finally attacks, it's Trump's head that should be there because he's the president during the 2020 calendar period. And so we, of course, like I said, we see the Trump profile, like the presidential mullet in this way this guy wrote it. But, so we get this attack, it looks like, on Trump. We even saw it in the eyebrows, right? It looks like possibly, like the Julian T said, I believe, that this may be Trump laid out on what? 7/5. Okay? And so we get these various things, but there was a problem with the interpretation. One difficulty that bothered me, and if you notice in that video, when I was going through and showing, well, we found Trump being attacked here and Trump being attacked there and Trump in these different scenes, I didn't bring up this one again. So I don't remember bringing it up. And there was a reason for it. This one, it looks like the shot comes from what? The 23rd. The shot comes from the 23rd and hits close to July 5th. Now, how are we going to get, quote unquote, an assassination attempt from the elites against him, a fake one, in order to, stir up problems in society or whatever? That takes, what, 10, 12 days to hit? Well, I don't know how that works. And so I was like, well, how does this work? Because now this is the shot that keeps making all these marks in these other scenes. How do we get that from June 23rd to July 5th? Because I thought, well, maybe this is the dual application thing. This is the tropical storm forming or storms forming in the U.S. and this system moving towards New York City or the East Coast or something, and it finally hits. And I was trying to come up with explanations, and I think that's a possible layer of meaning that's still possibly correct. I think we see a lot of evidence of water events in the video, and that's probably going to actually happen. Plus, Neptune is retrograde on this date, so a water event starting then that hits after a week and a half or so makes sense. But it still sure does line up. The hitting sure lines up well with all the other depictions of attacks on him. And I mentioned at the end of the video on attacks on Trump that it doesn't have to be a physical attack. It can be a political attack. It can be trying to destroy his presidency and so on. And I mentioned that. But now we have something that we can fill in the details with, I think, that may be what's going on and what's being depicted here. The attack starting on the 23rd against Trump, hitting close to July 5th, just before July 5th. In the news, we see what's going on right now. The Trump administration seeks a restraining order to block Bolton book. Okay? So John Bolton, who was the former national secretary, security advisor, is apparently disclosing classified information that's going to be very, very damaging to Trump. Extremely damaging to Trump. So damaging that the Justice Department is trying to prevent him from releasing the book. It is a violation of non-disclosure agreements. Okay? And, so it says the Justice Department here, late Wednesday, ramped up its legal campaign by seeking a temporary restraining order to block publication of a book that is billed as a scathing rebuke of President Trump. They're trying to prevent Bolton from releasing the memoir as planned on June 23rd. According to the court filing, it is not clear how successful such a legal fight would be. The Justice Department described the book as a 500-plus page tome rife with classified information. Bolton, a conservative foreign policy hawk, insider's insider, this guy is, who served as national security advisor from April 2018 through September 2019, clashed with Trump throughout his tenure, officials have said. The acts that go on between these people are insane. All this news is nonsense. I don't even know. I have a hard time reading a full article because it's nonsense. When I read the news, I read it like I watch Pet Goat or movies, because what I'm looking for is a narrative, because I know it's all lies. It's a fiction. They make this stuff up and they put the stuff together. They're acting it out. It's crazy. But anyways, Bolton is trying to release the book on June 23rd, a book that could destroy the president. Bolton, here's the thesis of the book. Bolton, the publisher, said in the statement, argues in the book that the House committed impeachment malpractice by keeping their prosecution focused narrowly on Ukraine when Trump's Ukraine-like transgressions existed across the full range of his foreign policy, and Bolton documents exactly what those were and attempts by him and others in the administration to raise alarms about them. Okay? Apparently, in some of the previews that people were talking about, Trump was going to give China permission to use concentration camps and things like this. This is the type of stuff that's supposed to be in this book. It's supposed to be absolutely devastating, they say. Okay? And Trump is supposedly trying to stop it. Trump was impeached by the House in December for pressuring Ukraine to launch an investigation of former Vice President Joe Biden, the Democrats' presumptive presidential nominee. Yeah, okay. So the idea is right now a shot is scheduled to be fired on June 23rd. A political attack on Trump that has the potential to totally bring down his presidency, that they're bringing against, that the Justice Department is fighting against the release of this book. And this book is going to come out on June 23rd. Now, if we were to go back and look here and say, if the shot is fired on June 23rd and will hit in early July, we have a couple possibilities from what it looks like. One, the book is released, and after a couple weeks of people getting more and more upset about it, something happens. Someone in Congress proposes a second impeachment or whatever. Maybe any number of possibilities here. I'm not going to speculate too much. Or the other possibility is the shot is scheduled to be fired June 23rd, but they actually are successful in delaying it until it's finally released in early July or something. You see? The attack is going to be possibly one part of this looks like this book. That's been planned, obviously. Now look at the rhetoric out, some of these headlines. Trump whacked from within by John Bolton. It's a personal attack on Trump. They are attacking Trump in his presidency, and they're doing it politically in this way. And not only are they attacking in this way, they're going to attack by Bolton, it looks like. Now, if that's the case, then I think it's important that it's Bolton. At least there's a plausible case that can be made that it's important that they've chosen Bolton. And maybe they had chosen him a long time ago to do this. Because if we look here, we see it's the shark attacking the president, as we've seen. And it made me think, well, is Bolton the shark? Could this be one application of the shark? There's multiple layers of meaning. Perhaps Bolton is a shark. And so I looked this up, and there's a TV show from the 1990s called Street Sharks, a children's show. Street Sharks is an American-Canadian animated series about the adventures of crime-fighting half-man, half-sharks. Yeah, well, okay, it's not the best show. I looked up an episode just to see, and, Anyways, it ran for a few years, from 94 to 97. And what's really interesting is, check this out. Street Sharks, John Bolton Ripper. The great white character here, his name in the show is John Bolton. You can't make this stuff up. Look, here's Wikipedia's description of the characters. Ripster, voiced by Lee Tokar, I don't know. John Bolton is the smartest, the leader, and oldest of the four brothers who enjoys creating inventions. He has taken up most of his knowledge and skill from his father. He is also an avid pool player. In the first episode of the show, John rides a motorbike. When transformed into Ripster, that's his name when he's the shark, he becomes a great white shark, able to bite through steel, as well as having extrasensory abilities. So John Bolton is a shark. He's a great white shark. And I think that's pretty funny. I mean, this is 1994 to 1997. And John Bolton at the time, the real John Bolton, not the shark guy, was already in government. I mean, he wasn't a nobody. He was in the Reagan and Bush administrations in the 80s and 90s. He was involved in the Iran-Contra affair. So this is a guy who's been around. He didn't show up after this. Picking John Bolton as the name of a character at that time, there's a chance, a good chance, especially how Hollywood works and how the television industry works, that this is not at all coincidental that John Bolton was a shark and the smartest of the sharks and so on. That's his reputation in real life too. A very smart guy, aggressive, feisty, a hawk, these sorts of things. And so I think this is an interesting thing to add to what we've already been seeing here in this. It looks like the attack from the 23rd could be the shot fired could be this one from Bolton. Okay, and I think it's very plausible that that is the shot taken and will be the shot taken, and it's going to cause significant changes in the political workings of what's going on right now. This is going to lead to changes in how the people are governed, changes in Trump's behavior, changes in I don't even know what all is going to be involved in it yet. But we're going to have to watch and see. And if the timeline is right, like I've been explaining, I think is right, more or less, based on the interpretation of IPEC 02, what happens here is going to lead to changes that people aren't going to understand just how serious they are, possibly for up to a year if they're not paying close attention. Okay? And we're also, while that's all happening politically, we're going to see the U.S. possibly experiencing all sorts of other types of storms and flooding and problems. Okay, and along the way, perhaps you start to see gradual implementation of martial law. For example, if you have big flooding in New York City, to prevent looting and whatever else is happening, you start to have your martial law begin there. And then that may expand other areas where there's natural disasters. They love to make these big changes in a way that everybody's like, oh yeah, well, of course it's needed, so that it's not too shocking to the system. I mean, look what they did with the lockdown. They were able to get basically every church in the United States to shut almost, institutions to close, businesses to go out of business by closing up their doors as non-essential businesses, collapsing the economy, and convincing everybody to hide in their house and wear masks without big fights over it. By what? Well, by declaring a pandemic. It made sense to people. You know, when they roll out martial law, it's likely going to make sense to people. Oh, these riots are so bad. Oh, the flooding. I mean, what are we going to do? We can't let people loot and destroy everything in the streets and these other businesses and rob people. All of that. We got to have order and so on. So they like to do it that way. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's a gradual rollout over this period of time so that you don't even realize just how bad it got until you don't have any freedom next year at all. Right? So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking. So the lesson here too is, you know, we looked at that shot and we see some sort of shot hitting. Well, it looks like the shot is already being taken. They're starting. And the shot is not the type of thing that I think some people were looking for, if that's the only shot. We'll see if there's anything else. But I think this is probably, possibly the event that is supposed to happen during that time. I only see one thing hitting in this video before July 5th. Everything else seems to be, when you look at the classroom calendar, he's looking this way afterwards. And it really seems to take off in October to November. Now, these kids here, July, August, September, they don't look that much different than the kids over here. But these ones do. This one's got a hole in his head. This one's got a black eye and his mouth X'd out like he's been totally censored. He's unconscious. There's been a head collision here. Seems to me like if I were forced to pick a date for a quote-unquote false flag that leads to a war, that would be somewhere between September and October, maybe the very beginning of November. That's just my guess. This is speculation. I'm not predicting anything. But looking at this, that's what I would think. And I think what happens here is that shot, probably. And we're going to see things gradually continue to get worse. And it really is going to look bad over there. So that's just my thought, my opinion on that, and wanted to throw it out there before June 21st comes around and everybody's waiting for, whatever enormous event to happen. I don't know that we're going to see that enormous event. I think we might be seeing the shot about to be fired, and we're looking past it, waiting for a 50-meter tsunami or something. And I'm not saying that those sorts of things can't happen if they use weapons or whatever, but I don't know that that's in the plans, in the works right here. Okay, like, subscribe, share. Take care.